Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to Family Matters. Look, one of the very topical issues at the moment is charities. Should they be taxed or not? We are aware the government is looking at doing so. We don't have the details. But I'm no expert in this, and I'm a great fan of bringing in experts. And so I am very delighted to welcome to the show Associate Professor Dr Juliet Chevalier-Watts. Juliet, if I might, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And just for people who are slightly pedantic, Juliet is Dr. Juliet,
Yes.
but she's an associate professor at Waikato University in your Faculty of Law there. And if I was not to put too fine a point on it, you're an expert when it comes to matters of charities and law.
Yes, apparently so. Yes, I am.
Well, the context of this is that you wrote an opinion piece recently, and amongst many things that you wrote, which I found wonderful and actually quite refreshing, you said, without churches, New Zealand would plunge into irreversible poverty and chaos overnight. And if anything, churches should pay less tax and receive more government assistance. So that's quite a radical statement, music to my ears. But tell our viewers a little bit about, well, both yourself as obviously a law expert, associate professor, but this research which you undertook to come to this conclusion.
Yes. So it's a little bit of a journey, but I started out my academic career a number of years back, and I kind of fell into doing research into charity law that's extended on from equity and trusts. Within charity law sits religion, because that's one of the recognised legal charitable purposes in New Zealand and a number of other common law countries as well. And religions being charitable really caught my interest. Not least because I suppose I should make a bit of a confession here, is because I'm atheist. And I couldn't really understand why religions would be charitable, because I was thinking, we live in a secular society, there's so many agnostics, there's so many atheists like me. Why is it even relevant to have religions as charities? Surely they should just no longer be existing in the charitable sector anymore. So my work began, and I began to find myself in this really difficult position whereby I was discovering that actually religious charities are vital to the charity sector. So I began my PhD, and one of my supervisors, my chief supervisor, Sir Grant Hammond, who's sadly passed away since then, but he strongly recommended, and when Sir Grant strongly recommends something, you do it. So for anyone that doesn't know who Sir Grant was, he was Court of Appeal judge, New Zealand, fabulous lawyer, just brilliant mind, and I was very blessed to have him as my chief supervisor. But anyway, he strongly recommended that I have a look to see what religious charities were worth and what would happen if religious charities no longer existed in the charitable sector. So off I went, probably quite determined to find out that actually they weren't really going to be worth very much at all. Turns out nobody had done any research in New Zealand on this at all, but somebody had commenced some research in the US and Canada with regards to this. And it's a chap by the name of Brian J. Grimm and his daughter Melissa. And they, now obviously the US is clearly different from New Zealand in terms of their how religion is viewed. Certainly we could argue that New Zealand is a much more secular country than the US, and I think we'd be quite correct on that. But what was discovered by Brian J. Grimm and Melissa Grimm was that in 2016 in the US, this is just for 1 year alone, they worked out statistically that religious charities were worth 1.2 trillion US dollars just for 2016 alone, which was mind-blowing. And
that's huge,
wow,
isn't it? I mean, trillion. Just to stress that, isn't it? We're not talking trillions. Oh.
Literally trillions. And at the time it was bigger. That was worth more than Google, Amazon, Apple, and some oil and gas companies. So, you know, huge entities in the US. And I was like, okay, that's given me pause for thought, I must admit. And he did the same in Canada as well. Now, obviously Canada, different country, It's said to be a post-religious country, so very secular in many ways. And even in Canada alone, with their much smaller population, much more diverse population spread about across the country, religious charities are worth 67 billion Canadian dollars in 2018. And again, this utterly blew my mind. And I was like, right, what is New Zealand worth in that case? And as I said, nobody's done any research on that. So I got my PhD and decided that this needed to be changed. We needed to address this, because if I was going to say that religious charities were actually beneficial to New Zealand, I needed to have something else other than the law behind me. Because I can argue till I'm blue in the face about how charity law is a defendable concept with regard to religious charities. But for atheists like me or agnostics like me, we need something else there to say, really, what are they actually worth? Because praying for me just ain't going to work for me, I'm afraid. So I persuaded a fabulous professor by the name of Frank Scrimgeour, who heads up accounting and finance at the Waikato Management School at the University of Waikato. It is his bread and butter, working these things out. So Frank does the maths on this. I do law. And together we've come together to work out how much religious charities are worth in New Zealand. And it's taken a lot of doing. I can't lie about this. The figures are all there for the general public to go and view. So every single charity that's registered in New Zealand has to make their accounts available publicly. So you can go and look if you want to. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's going to take you a bit of doing, because there's so much information out there. And that's one of the problems with trying to harvest this data, is that it takes a long time. So we chose 2016 as a date to utilize. And the reason we chose that was because it was just prior to, 2018. Thinking about the US again, 2018, it was just prior to COVID. And obviously everything impacted on the charitable sector once COVID hit and then post-COVID. So we thought that might skew the data somewhat. So let's take a rational year, 2018. And we came up with some astonishing figures as well, or an astonishing figure for religious charities in New Zealand. And again, just blew my mind, considering that people have declared that they haven't really got much faith anymore, that Christianity is losing ground hugely. So just to give you an idea, in New Zealand, religious charities for 2018 were worth 6.1 billion New Zealand dollars for that 1 year alone.
6.1 billion.
Billion. Considering we've got a population of 5.5, 6 million. I mean, and we claim that we're a secular country, that nobody's really interested in religion. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us how fundamental New Zealand, religious charities are to New Zealand, because that was worth about 3% of the government's expenditure in that year, and that was more than, or it was worth more than commercial fishing and the forestry combined. And we know how much importance those are given to the sector, or to New Zealand society. Everyone thinks about fishing, they think about forestry. What they don't think about is what charities do. And that's because charities operate in the background. And religious charities specifically have done something that shoots themselves in the foot. They do not speak of their own work, of their own good works that they do. What is that phrase that is utilized in New Zealand? The kumara does not speak of its own sweetness.
That's the whakatoki. It's a very apt one. I suppose it just goes. I mean, you obviously interviewed and engaged a number of these religious charities. I assume humility, for want of a better word, is a part of them. Certainly the ones I've been involved with, both religious and non-religious. We don't really shout about it, but you're saying that's actually a major problem.
Yes, I've met with so many religious entities, churches, bodies. I met a couple of 3 weeks ago with the Christian leaders of New Zealand. Amazing group of people. And, they welcomed me with open arms, even considering the fact that I was atheist. I was frankly just trying not to burst into flames this entire time as I was talking to them. But,
That's right. I'm
um,
Catholic. I'm trying not to burst into flames when I talk to Christian leaders.
Um, but they were so intrigued by my research, and we just talked for such a long time. But I was a wee bit rude to them, I must admit, and they took it in good sorts, basically. But I said, "You do not tell people the amazing work that you do." And they went, "Well, no, we mustn't, because it's not as part of our ethos of our approach to religion is to ensure just we do good works, but we must do it quietly. Why should we boast of it?" And I went, "No, you don't have to boast of it, but nobody knows what you do. Not really." And they went, "Yes, that's a good point. But we are still a bit snookered." And they went, "Well, what can we do about that?" And I went, "Well, maybe you want to employ a tame atheist who'll do it for you. I know somebody that can do that." And they did laugh about that, but I don't think they really took me that seriously. But so here's the conflict. Is that, as far as I'm concerned, no God exists. No gods exist, no goddesses, regardless. Yeah. So, as far as I'm concerned, religions shouldn't exist. But they absolutely should. Because without them, I absolutely would argue until I'm blue in the face that without them, the charity sector would probably fall over in so many ways, because it's not just religious people that benefit from their good works. A whole range of secular communities benefit from their good works, through their outreach, through the food that they provide, through the clothing that they provide, the education that they provide. And well, we all know about the Salvation Army. Of course we do. Every Christmas we hear about them, but that's not all that they do. And anyone who is in need can take advantage of that. But there are hundreds and hundreds of other religions that do exactly that, but way more quietly than that. So just share one particular story, actually two stories, I think. When I was with the religious leaders, one of the bishops, and I won't say who they were, which church they sat within, because I suspect they would want to be anonymous on this, but they said, with regard to one of their churches, they have a number of people who are homeless that come to their church on a very regular basis, not to any sermons or anything like that, but just because the doors are open, because they know that they can find somebody to talk to, because they don't talk to anybody else, and they are desperately lonely, hugely lonely, because nobody wants to talk to homeless people anyway. If you see somebody who's homeless, you invariably just walk straight past them, don't you? We've all done it, especially terrible atheists like myself. But no matter where you are in life, you often just try to ignore them because you can't bear the guilt of it. Well, these homeless people will go to this church and they will find somebody who doesn't judge them, who will just sit and listen to them. And one of the people went, "This has stopped me from suicide." And I'm going, okay, well, if they've saved one person, that's not even anything they advertise. They don't go, "Come along to our church and save yourselves from suicide." They just go, it's just here. And there was another conversation that I had with somebody a couple of 3 years back when I was really just beginning this whole thing of a religious church. Obviously, it's a religious church, of a church that they say, if they find that, say somebody's loved one has died and that family cannot afford to give their loved one a send-off, then that religion will pay for the funeral for that family. Can you imagine the relief for that family? They would have had to have got themselves in the most terrible debt otherwise, because funerals are expensive, crazy expensive. Who has that money to be able to say goodbye to their loved one? So that's just two very tiny little stories. I've got hundreds of these stories, and I go, we can't lose religious charities.
No, it's I mean, I'm biased, if you will. I mean, I've worked with religious charities. I see what they do. Not all and every one, as you say. There's so many of
Yeah.
them, but they
Yeah.
would it be fair to say they underpin the charity sector? Because of course, there's
Oh,
more
100%.
charities than just religious charities, but
Of
it's
course
the
there are.
religious charities which are really probably
Yes.
the majority and probably do the most, financially
Yes.
included.
And to be honest, you are right, actually. If we go and look at the data from Charity Services, from Department of Internal Affairs, Charity Services, which is the Charity Services, the governing body, as it were, for our registered charities in New Zealand. So they're the ones that register them. They're the ones that monitor them, make sure they're all complying with charity law, which is very stringent, by the way. So if anyone is thinking that religious charities are getting this amazing benefit from some of the tax relief they have, perhaps they would like to go and try to apply for charitable status and understand exactly the onerous obligations that they must comply with in order to A, get charitable status, and then B, maintain that charitable status. It is a nightmare, frankly. And I'm not decrying the charity services, because we must have stringent laws to ensure that nobody is, taking advantage. So all charities get certain types of tax exemptions, but these tax exemptions mean that they can actually put that money that they would have spent on tax into assisting the homeless, those that can't feed themselves, childcare for those that desperately need assistance with childcare, to provide buildings at lower market rent or free for people to come along, for their elderly to go there once or twice a week. All of these sorts of things that if we were then to tax them more, or create a new tax system, then suddenly those religious charities are going to go, well, we can't carry out some of these good works in that case, because now we have to pay our taxes, and nobody is going to make up for that. The government is not going to put the 6.1 billion New Zealand dollars in from 2016 to go, oh, there we go, religious charities, don't worry, we'll make up for that. Of course they won't. They've got that money. I mean, we already
And
know that
they wouldn't be efficient either, even if I mean, and it's not going to happen. Pigs will fly, but it's the government will not be putting the money. If they end up taxing these charities, religious or otherwise, I doubt that money is going to be ring fenced for, say, social services. But even if they were to put the money in, it will be less efficient. And one only needs to do the thought experiment. The government has to pay all of its advisors and bureaucrats and employees to do whatever they have to do. Most
Correct.
of these charities, religious or otherwise, and we're certainly talking religious charities, work on volunteers. So when you do that 6.1, yeah, sorry.
So if we look at just the volunteers, so you say you have one person that is paid in the church. For that one person that's paid in the church, there will be, on average, 6 volunteers carrying out those good works. Now, I'm afraid no government department is going to have the benefit of 6 additional people doing their work for free. Of course they won't. Nobody's expecting them to do that. But churches can do that.
So were you able to capture that in that 6.1 billion? No.
Not really. So we still haven't quite captured that, I know, because some religious charities have got back to us and gone, well, we've actually got way more than that volunteers. So some of what you've got is not quite accurate. So we're probably suggesting that we've come in with a much lower figure than actually the reality of what religious charities are worth. So, that's the difficulty of trying to mine this data, and for entities to give the most accurate information that they can on an annual basis. So again, you have to find somebody who will voluntarily give this information. They know that they have to, but it's burdensome. And a lot of these people are not accountants. They're not tax experts. They're not lawyers. They are your coral garden Joe Public, who just has to do this stuff because the law requires of them to do that. And they go, well, God, how many volunteers have we got this week? Maybe we've got 5. They might be mistaken on that. They might actually have 25, but they just forgot about some other people. Do you know what I mean? So they're not lying about these things. If anything, that they're underestimating how good they really are. So for me, I think there has to be a lot more work carried out by people like me and Professor Frank Scrimgeour to actually work out what religious charities are truly worth today, not 2018 when we were doing it. Find out in today's money what they are worth, and then have the conversation about what it will cost the taxpayer if religious charities are taxed additionally, because you can bet your bottom dollar it will be the taxpayer that will be stumping up for
Yep.
whatever services are lost. Or, in fact, are just lost completely and nobody pays for it, and people will not be helped.
I've always been struck. I mean, I've said it in different spaces. I've actually sat down with Sue Barker, so she
Oh,
practices
yes,
law in the charity space,
she
and
does.
it won't
She's
surprise you.
fabulous. Mm,
Yeah, again, similar insights to yourself, although you've come from a more deeply academic space,
yeah.
and obviously the research around the numbers. I mean,
Mm,
it for me, it's quite simple insofar as every dollar which a charity makes as profit, in effect, goes to help people. And
and it has
importantly,
to by law.
exactly right. And as you say, quite transparent. And if the government
Yeah,
takes some of that money, that's less money for helping people or
that's
doing good
right.
works. And you've touched, if you don't mind, you've obviously the
Mm,
atheistic side. And why I was,
mm,
if you don't mind, touch on that briefly is
yeah.
people's perception of the good is what's charitable. In other words,
Mm,
we may disagree with people's perspectives or their views. I know some
mm.
people don't like Destiny Church, some people don't like what sanitarium's doing. I see a
Yes,
journalist
and
wrote
they are
about
very easy targets as well.
they are. And,
Yeah.
it's just, I suppose I see a lot of people, in my view, Julia,
Mm,
attacking charities because they disagree with them. But that's not how
yeah.
charity law works. It says if you've got a
No,
conception of the good, you're allowed to work and promote it, even if others disagree with you.
absolutely. You've raised a really good point here. So, A, charities are allowed to make a profit, but that money has to go back in to supporting their charitable purposes. And this is what is assessed by the Charity Services of New Zealand to ensure that that happens. Now, we then come on to this issue of, oh yes, but some of these charities, that they're a bit troublesome. We get a bit worried about what they might be saying, and they're a bit controversial. Well, who are we to say in a democratic society whether something is beneficial or not just because it might be controversial? Let me take you back many, many years for this issue of controversiality and charitability. Back in the day, when we had slavery, a number of charities were set up in the 1600s, 1700s to try to abolish slavery. That was deeply unpopular at the time. People decried those charities, saying what a terrible thing that would be to lose slavery. How awful would that be? Well, of course, it would be for many. They're going to lose an awful lot of money. But that was just the start of charities being controversial. Charities sometimes do have to be controversial to raise awareness. They're the ones that know who are suffering in this world. We had this with the women's movement, which is still deeply unpopular in many circles as well, I'm afraid. And the rainbow community fighting for their rights, which they blooming well should have had way before time. But, the rainbow community fighting for their rights is still deeply unpopular, but they are charitable. Just because you're controversial does not mean to say that you cannot be charitable. So long as you are complying with charity law and that you are engaging with your charitable purposes and ensuring that it can be noted by the charity services, that it's there on your accounts, etc., then it doesn't matter whether somebody disagrees with your perception. I don't agree with religion. Does that mean to say that I don't think religious charities should exist? Of course it doesn't. And
And I
I'm
think that's
prepared
for
to
me a
admit that.
critical. I think it's a critical point, and I'm somewhat biased on this one in that Family First lost its charitable status because people disagreed with its views. And
Yes.
I'd better be clear. I don't want to drag you into that rabbit hole, but the judges were quite clear. They said, no, we don't really think your viewpoint, particularly on the nature of family, are needed anymore. And regardless of that Family First judgment, and I know
Mm,
it sent a chill down the spine of a number of charities, including who have very different
yes,
viewpoints, to go, whoa,
it did.
whoa. The
Yes.
state stepped in and said, we'll
Yeah.
decide what we think's good for you,
Yeah.
Simon, or for you, Juliet, rather than actually, there's going to be a range of charities who have
Yeah.
conflicting senses of the good, but they're still a
Yes.
charity.
That's right. And look, that's a whole other different conversation. I think that we could go on for hours with
Yeah.
regard to the Family First decision. And I probably shouldn't be talking about it right now. But like yourself, it did send a shiver down my spine. Now, I might not agree with some of the policies of Family First, but there are many aspects, I think, with regard to the Supreme Court decision that I would have some significant views on. I think is probably what I would probably say on that particular point. But
Yeah. As I say,
I
not
probably
to
should
drag
be
you
talking
into
about that.
the rabbit hole of commentary on that one. It's just
No, that's right.
illustrative of
Yeah.
again where charities should
Yes.
be, which does it then make it an irony in your thinking that because we often hear about the separation of church and state, and yet
Yes.
arguably what the government's proposing, and I keep saying we don't know the details, we just know intention, that the
Yeah.
state is going to be bringing itself now into, well, to be fair, the charity space, but mainly the religious
Yes.
charity space, and
Yes.
inserting itself quite directly, not only with what it deems is and is not charitable, but also taking
Mm.
those charities' monies.
Oh, absolutely. And, people often question why on earth charities should be allowed to make a profit. How terrible of them to be able to earn some money. And okay, I'll focus on religious charities and I'm going, I absolutely state categorically that those charities should be making a profit because should we ever get another COVID situation, charities suffered terribly during the COVID times because many of them had no fallback, financial fallback. They were absolutely ruined because they had no way of paying for any repairs. They had no way of paying their staff, anything like that. So I would absolutely state that charities should operate more, perhaps more as a business in order to obtain some cash flow, to make sure that they have strength, and actually for forward planning as well. Because a charity should be able to say, okay, this year we're going to carry out these particular purposes, but next year I think we need to build on that because we have seen how damaging this particular situation is in society. So we know that many people are going to be impacted by this. So we need to help these X people within this particular society. The homeless, perhaps, those addicted to drugs, which are also very controversial people to be helping as well, because people go, why no? But they've kind of made it that did they not do that themselves? They are just as worthy for receiving assistance as anybody else. And the churches do this. The churches
And you
don't care
pointed
who
out
these
too
people
that
are.
the reporting is clear. I've forgotten who
Yes,
I
it
was
is.
talking to about it, but yeah, charities will put money aside, profits aside,
Yes.
and hold them in reserve. So in other words, it doesn't all get spent on the good works or
No,
the
that's right.
promotion of, but it's got to be
They
reported.
it still has to be accounted for. The law has, there was an amendment bill that came in last year, the year before, I'll think of it in a minute, that actually referred to if you are holding on to any profits, any additional money, accumulation of funds, you have to justify it. So it's not like people are sitting there lining their pockets with all this money going, oh gosh, I'm very rich now. Since when have many religious charities been particularly rich? I know somebody will go, well, the Catholic churches, but that's a whole separate argument. They've got
I've got
buildings, but
huge amounts of cash behind me. It's why I've got
oh,
this
of
green
course, you can
screen here.
hardly find your way out of the door climbing
Well,
your way through all
what
that
about
money.
the people will point out though? So there's obviously lots of the little charities. I think of the hospice shops that are being
Yeah,
run and so forth.
yes.
But you'll
Mm,
often hear people talk about the bigger ones who are operating like Sanitarium, Mission Vineyards. These are
yes.
big
Yeah,
businesses competing
they
with
are.
others. Any thoughts or
Yes.
reflections on there, or is
So many
seeking to
thoughts on that.
challenge? Yo, well then I better let you speak.
So I absolutely welcome entities like Sanitarium, which might come as a surprise to some people. They're a huge organized, they're a huge business, profitable business. They are still governed by the same charity laws. They cannot line their own profits. There are no shareholders demanding payouts annually. And Sanitarium's accounts are just as available to anybody to review, to see what they're doing with that money. And actually, it's really evident what Sanitarium is doing with that money. They have their breakfast club, where they provide food to children who don't have food. Children can't learn at school if they are hungry. You know what it's like sometimes if you miss a meal, you're like, oh, blimey, all I can think about is dinner. Your stomach's rumbling away. Imagine being a child and not having that food. You're hungry for days and days. Sanitarium sorts that out for hundreds and hundreds of children. And it provides relief work in many of the Pacific Islands. Samoa and Tonga, I believe, are two of the huge recipients of housing. Literal houses have been built by sanitarium. Um, Providing food banks, clothing, especially in times of, we've got the cyclone coming in now, but when we get cyclones, they're not quite the same as when Samoa, Vanuatu,
Mm.
Tonga get
I've
cyclones.
lived through one in Fiji, and don't get me wrong, the
Yeah,
weather down here in New Zealand can be fierce, but it's got
yes,
nothing of being hit by a full cyclone. I think too something
that's
like the
right.
Wheat Bix triathlon, and I suppose for me
Yes.
that just illustrates the. I mean, two reflections from me. One is
Mm,
even if, and I want to stress that, even if
mm,
there's something not quite right with a sanitarium type
yeah,
arrangement, uh, if the government targets that, they're going to be targeting a whole lot of others who are actually doing
yes,
the right and proper. But the
correct.
fundamental point remains. Yeah, they run a business, but their charitable
Yes.
purpose doesn't matter if it's houses in the Pacific, breakfast
Mm,
clubs. There's good work going on, and it's at all
that's right.
fully accountable.
Yeah.
Um,
And should we not actually be going, let's support our charitable sector? We came through COVID and the finances of this country, I think you'll probably know more than this or than me, but they were pretty disastrous. And I think they are still pretty disastrous. And should we not actually be saying to ourselves and to our communities, why don't we encourage more charities? Why are we actually questioning what charities are doing when there are way more people that desperately need their help? And the charities are better placed to provide that help than anybody in government is. If you went into government and said, who are the people that need the help the most? In Hamilton, for instance, where I live, the government will go, I don't know, actually. Maybe the charities will know. Yes, they will know. They will know exactly who needs the help, how they need it, culturally what's appropriate for those particular families or individuals. It's not for a government minister to come along and go, well, I don't think some of these charities are operating appropriately. If you think those charities are not operating appropriately, then investigate them individually. If you think that they are carrying out criminal activities, not that I'm saying they would, I'm just grasping at straws there, or that they are defrauding the tax office, something like that, then get IRD involved
and our
and
laws are there
have
for
them
that, aren't
investigate.
they? We don't have to
Correct.
use the charity law to punish charities.
Yeah.
It's one of the things in recent weeks and months with, some charities or church groups sort of really pushing the envelope, including around violence. I'm thinking of the storming of the library. You go, well, you don't need the
Oh,
charity
yeah.
law. You don't need to hit people over the
No,
head with the charity law. We've got criminal law and tax law in
absolutely.
general.
And 100% they should be charged with whatever criminal acts they carried out and to the fullness of the criminal law. 100%. There was appalling acts there. But some of it was not carried out under Destiny Church's name. It was other individuals that decided they wanted to carry out violence for because they're sick individuals. Well, they should absolutely be punished for carrying out those types of acts. But you're right, that's nothing to do with charity law. That's not
Yeah.
a charitable purpose, carrying out violence. Of course it's not. So punish those, not the whole group.
Yeah, and I think others have said this before. I mean, ultimately, charities sit beside the government, and
Yeah.
I would argue it's part of a very healthy, flourishing democracy that actually people
Yes.
are able to pursue what they deem to be good. And I think we need that flexibility. But one thing I was struck, and I think it was some reporter was noting that charity law is about 400 or so years old, coming out
Yes.
of the
It is.
Elizabethan age. And again, they
It
were
is.
particularly obsessed with religion and saying, well, it's 400-year-old law. Isn't it time to get isn't it time to get rid of it? And I thought I'd put that to you as a
Yeah.
professor of law because
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of laws like our Bill of Rights, effectively, or Magna Carta, which are based off very
Mm.
old legal tradition.
Yeah.
Should we just be tossing
Yeah.
those out too?
No, absolutely not. And I'll tell you why with regards to charity law. So human rights not my area, by the way, so I'll ignore the Bill of Rights bit. But
Okay.
for charity law, um, charity law is able to evolve as society requires it to do so. So I gave you the example earlier of um, uh, slavery, anti-slavery charities. Um, being recognized as being charitable, even though they were hugely unpopular. And we had the Supreme Court talk about back in 2014 when Greenpeace was fighting for its charitable life. And they were successful eventually in obtaining the charitable status back again. The Supreme Court talked about how charity actually should be able to function as the supporting the machinery and harmony of civil society. And that means that the law that came about from the Statute of Elizabeth 1601, and you're absolutely right, it really is that old, from the charitable purpose that existed then, well, we have since then evolved those charitable purposes that are kind of analogous to some of those purposes seen in that 1601 Act. So we now have charities that reflect human rights. Well, that never would have been considered in Elizabethan times.
Right.
Of course not, that's right. Animal welfare. That never would have been a charity back in 1601. So we already know that charities can evolve as society requires. Again, I refer to the rainbow community, that they have many charities. Women's rights, we now have many charities. So to say that these laws are far too old and shouldn't we just throw them out with the bathwater? No, we already have good law that we can interpret, and we know that it functions appropriately.
And I mean, it won't surprise you that I agree with that too. I'm for me, it's about more, not less. It's about actually freedom rather than control. And it always makes me nervous. I'm not a human rights expert either, but well, actually, it's not quite true. That's my philosophical background. And so I understand people have different conceptions of the good. And that's why charities, well, one of the reasons charities exist, to allow people to pursue that. Juliet, I'm very conscious of your time, and this has been, I have to say, a wonderful and fulsome discussion. I mean, I just think it's fascinating. I will be looking forward to seeing, I assume you're going to be doing further research or update the figures. You said 6.1 billion was from 2018.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Frank and I are now, so we looked at some health charities and some education charities as well. So that research is out in the ether at the moment, looking to be published. The wheels of academia turn slowly, I have to say, when it comes to publishing. But we are now onto our next part of looking at religious charities and actually what it will cost the government should they decide to tax religious charities more. So it will take a wee while for that research to come to its fruition, but I think that will be very, very interesting indeed. So watch this space.
No pressure. The budget's in May.
I know. I know.
Juliet, I am so grateful for your time, and I'm sure on behalf of actually many viewers, we're grateful for you speaking so candidly, but actually along with Frank, if I'm not sounding too informal, to have actually gone in and done this work and research. So again, thanks for your time. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you for letting me talk about my research. It's obviously my passion. Thank you very much indeed.